So Darlene, I want to introduce you and your panel now. Thank you all for attending our second panel of the day at the Connected Virtual Tech event. And I'm very pleased to introduce our event chair and our moderator for today, Darlene Pope. Darlene is an experienced executive in the digital transformation and Office of the Future space, and one of the most knowledgeable people that I know in this industry. And so, Darlene, thank you for being part of the event, for being our event chair. You've put together a number of terrific panels, this being one of them. And from here, I'm going to introduce you and let you take your panel and go forward. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Rich. Thanks for having all of us. It's been a thrill to chair this event. And thank you to all of our panelists for joining today. I love the fact that we've got such great representation from the real estate industry on this kickoff session. So our topic is, how do I get people back in my buildings? Which I think is a great follow-up from Jennifer Moss's opening this morning, talking about the psychology of getting people back to work. So we're going to talk a little bit about physically tangible technology solutions to get people back to work. So we have a stellar panel this morning. I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to launch into our discussion. So if you can just give us, just tell us who you are, what company you're with, and what you do. We've got Tommy Russo from Akridge, Ashley Lippitt from CBRE, Kent Tarrach from PGIM, and Scott Anderson from Commongrounds today. So Kent, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks again for having me a part of the panel today. Very excited to join everyone here. So again, my name is Kent Tarrach, and I'm with Prudential or PGIM Real Estate, and I am responsible for overseeing their commercial office portfolio across the New York metro area.
Great, thanks. And Scott Anderson.
Good morning, everyone, or I think it's good morning everywhere for anyone who's watching. Really looking forward to the conversation today. I work here at Commongrounds. I oversee our sales marketing divisions as well as our product line, specifically around our mobile application that we use for management of our locations. So I have I'm really looking forward to the conversation about how we can use different technologies and different approaches towards getting people back into the office.
Great. And Tommy Russo.
I'm Tommy Russo. I am Senior Vice President of Technology and Engineering Services for Akridge. And our portfolio is in Washington, D.C., North Carolina, and the surrounding metropolitan areas.
Great. Thank you, Tommy. And Ashley, I think your mute is, there you go.
Yeah. Hi, Ashley Lippett. I am a part of the CBRE host team, which is our people and digital technology workplace solution. And I serve as an innovation and strategic lead there. I actually run what we call host labs. And so we're constantly on the forefront of figuring out how to better solve these sorts of challenges. So it's exciting to be a part of the conversation.
Great, thanks, Ashley. So Scott, I'm going to kick off with you. We've heard a lot about co-working and flex space and getting people back to work safely. Can you tell us a little bit about what are your biggest challenges in getting people back to work?
Sure. So it's obviously a unique time right now, and what we're trying to do is kind of thread the needle between making people comfortable going back to work while also not pushing people to go back to work. One of the things that we've identified early on is that no matter what your position is on what your plans are going forward, the most important person is the consumer. And whether that's for us, our individual users, our enterprise users, or anywhere in between, or whether it's for another organization where it's their little employees, what we're trying to do is find approaches that will make people comfortable to come back and then let them make that decision on their own when they will return to the office. So a few different things that we've done are utilizing some existing technologies we had just to keep track of who is coming into the office. So we'll have kind of a weekly rolling average of how many individuals are in the space at a given time. And we'll share that with people to identify, hey, if you're interested in coming in, but prefer to be in at a less dense time, it turns out between Friday, between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. is actually our least occupied times, surprisingly. But we can talk towards things like that and say, hey, here's a time when it's less dense. Or maybe you're the opposite. You want to go in and feel a buzz. We can tell you, hey, on Tuesday mornings, it's actually fairly busy in the space. Obviously, busy is a relative term given the time period. But what we're trying to do is take whatever we can to learn from what's going on currently and then just provide that information to bring people back. And then as we start to, round the corner on this, whenever that does happen, we have a few different plans and processes that we've put together to make sure that we kind of retain that comfort level that we've been trying to build out over the last few months. So that's things along the lines of enhanced cleaning schedules, and actually providing those cleaning schedules to our members so they know exactly when and where the places will be cleaned. Doing as much touchless interaction as we can, utilizing some virtual tools to keep the face-to-face communication to a minimum while still allowing for conversations like this. And then frankly, just listening to our customers and our employees to understand what makes them comfortable, and trying to, move desks around. We have our proprietary wall system where we can make some changes and give you more individual space or less individual space. So it's kind of a cacophony, a ton of things that we have to put together. But the ultimate goal we're looking for is, what can we do to make everyone comfortable so they can make that decision to come back on their own?
Mm-hmm. So Tommy, you've got kind of two perspectives here. You've got Akridge as a company, and you've got Akridge as an owner manager. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing. Scott mentioned being able to manage traffic flow and occupancy of people coming into the building. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing from an Akridge enterprise standpoint to manage people coming in, and then also what are you doing as a building owner?
So as Akridge as a corporation, we decided when the pandemic first happened, we would write an app that requires all of our on-site personnel to go to every day, fill out an online questionnaire that either affirms or says whether you're on PTO, in the office, or working remotely. If you choose PTO or working remotely, it just spits it out and goes into our attendance tracking system. If you are going to go into the office, what it does is it then pulls up the CDC required questions to make sure you answer the correct answer for all the questions. If it does, it prints out, it forwards you a QR code through your email. That QR code then allows us to track how many people are in the office and grant you access to the office. So at a real-time basis, if you want to go into the office on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, or Saturday or Sunday for that matter, you can see how many people are actually in the office. And we've also made this available to all of our building clients. If they wanted to use it, we were happily share the technology with them. And from a portfolio perspective, we're using access control to manage and monitor the inhabitants of the building. So we're specialized cleaning on the places where there are people on a real-time basis. We're using analytical engines to figure out where people are, and those are the high-touch areas are the ones that are being cleaned and disinfected on a regular basis.
So Tommy, you're using a mobile app for your employees, for Akridge employees, to have a QR code, which is basically their access into the property. Where is the dividing line, though, between the owner's responsibility to manage occupancy in the building?
Well, we as an owner of a building manage our corporate, our personnel, meaning the people that work for Akridge. As it pertains to a leasee, that is upon them to manage their personnel. We can't say, hey, you can only have 10 people in the space. They lease that space. It's their space to lease. So if they choose to have 10 people or 100 people in their space, that's on them. We're not going to have an engineer or property manager or building manager walk in and say, hey, you're too over occupied. That's between them and their lease. We're not sheriffs. Mm-hmm. We manage and run the building.
Yeah. So Ashley, from a CBRE standpoint, how are you managing occupancy, whether it's for CBRE corporate, whether it's for your tenants? I think probably the biggest concern right now is managing occupancy. And if the CDC or if a local jurisdiction says you can only have 50% of your permitted occupancy, how do you manage that?
Yeah, I love a lot of what Scott and Tommy just said, because it really echoes, I think, what as an industry we really know we need to do. And so I would summarize it as, we need to be able to create strategies and tools and supports to meet our clients where they are, and for them to meet their employees where they are. So this is employee experience in so many ways, but also with a real emphasis on reduction of risk, ensuring that people feel safe, but also that they still feel the good stuff that brings them to the workplace. So, one of the things that we know and have been able to do through the CBRE Host app for both our occupier and our building clients is is we kind of had a head start. We've also implemented and created a robust questionnaire like what Tommy was talking about that is tied to local and CDC regulations. We work with our partners so that we can figure out the appropriate set of questions. And then beyond that, Darlene, to your point, you know, when we tie the app to the other technologies or hardware in the space, things like sensors, what we can do is look at heat maps of where people are, when they're coming in, how they're most frequently using the space. We can do that in real time, but we can also do that to help clients make better decisions about reduction of of employees in the space in the future if it feels like it's getting too crowded. The other thing we all know is that social distancing is very real. So our app serves as an intermediary between on-site teams who then can really maintain the policies that are in place, but then also the employees who are coming in, and we can kind of guide that workflow and guide that occupancy.
So Kent, from a PGIM standpoint, as the investment manager, the owner, if you will, tell us a little bit about your challenges in getting people back to work, and what are some of the tools and technologies that you're deploying to support that? You may need to turn your mic on.
Thank you. So in line with what everybody else touched on, certainly a variety of tools that we're either implementing directly or in partnership with our operators. Temperature checks in the lobby, certainly signage and decals to ensure social distancing throughout the building and all the common areas, the heightened cleaning activities, looking at digital access solutions and other touchless technologies. And so, you know, there's a general acceptance that all those features need to be incorporated into the return to work effort that we're all undertaking. Taking that one step further, you know, the communication that we need to have both at the corporate level with the individuals that are responsible for the corporate spaces within the building, but also getting these direct channels in with the individual occupants so that they know the work that we're doing and can then make a determination about the comfort level they have around returning. And so that's something we're actively doing. It's interesting. I think pre-COVID, there had been this push about various tenant engagement platforms. And again, my colleagues here have touched on it. These tenant engagement platforms that connect people to the amenities, services, and features that a building has. But now that's been pivoted a little bit so that now we can run these wellness checks through the systems, the communication about the efforts we're making to keep the building safe and secure and healthy, you know, log on a daily basis, you know, the amount of people that are in the building, where they're going, and also provide that check around the social distancing. So those types of initiatives we're pursuing across the portfolio. Certainly what we're seeing is there's some nuance between, on a region by region basis, what's critically important. In the New York market, for example, certainly the challenge that we're having is the public transit and getting people to the office. That's less of an issue in some of our other markets. And so we're having to kind of curate our approach based on the region where the buildings are located.
Well, Kent, let's talk a little bit about the physical operations of the building, because, you know, Jennifer talked about the psychology of getting people feeling safe at work, but there's also kind of the tangible, what can we physically do to make sure that our buildings are safe and are healthy? And several things that come to mind are, first of all, indoor air quality. We've all seen Dr. Joe Allen from Harvard on CNN talking about filtration, additional outside air. You know, so can you tell us a little bit about maybe some of the physical operations of the building that you're doing differently, whether it's touchless technologies, UV lighting? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there.
Sure, and you touched on a couple of the main ones there. So first and foremost, from an operational and building management perspective, it's heightened cleaning in all of the common areas, certainly the elevators, anywhere that there's some touch involved, and looking at ways that we can reduce that. So putting films or changing out the elevator buttons to reduce the bacteria that can stay on those surfaces. using access control, using your smartphone to access our buildings so you're not touching anything there. And from an air filtration perspective, certainly using the MERV filters and making sure that if they were not already in use at the buildings to get those installed across the portfolio. We are doing quite a bit of research around the ionic air filtration and the charging of particles to clean the air that way. There's some mixed messaging around that. And so there's still some work that needs to be done to figure out what is the best solution in that regard. But the hope is that, through some continued research and shared data across our peers in the industry, that we can start to understand what the best strategy is. Because the technologies that we're deploying at this point, air filtration being a certain one of those, these aren't competitive advantages. These are things that we need to do as an industry to get people back to work. And so if somebody finds a good solution, I think, conferences like this and behind the scenes, the conversations that are being had, this is what's going to help people get comfortable about returning to the office, to know that across the industry, we are collectively doing what's in the best interest of our customers and our occupants to return them to the office.
Right. So Scott, I think there's a little bit of a dichotomy here with, back to work and co-working and flexible space. On the one hand, the studies are showing that there's a higher demand for co-working and a higher demand for flexible space because of the hub and spoke model, and they want to be able to go someplace closer to their home. On the other hand, there's the discussion around, do you really want to be sitting in a co-working facility where that other people are using that same space? And so from your standpoint, how are you mitigating that risk, if you will, through the use of technology and, whether it's, cleaning or UV light or some of the things that Kent was talking about? What are you guys doing at Commongrounds to make sure that your members are coming back and they feel safe from a health standpoint?
Sure. So we have kind of two different tracks of membership at our sites, and both of them have kind of different expectations, but same results. From our enterprise standpoint, where we have, one client takes the entirety of our space and they use that for a longer period of time, what we'll do is we'll actually sit down in discussions with their teams to understand what their company is doing. What we're trying to accomplish at Commongrounds is to have essentially the same level of service you would have at your headquarters. So whether it's additional cleaning at your site, whether you have the UV hand sanitizer that you walk by, or whether you have the UV lights that you're waving over the different surfaces, we try to match what their main corporate headquarters is doing, and then enhance it in any way that we feel comfortable with. So in any of our locations, we make sure we have our HVAC running and bringing in more outside air, opening windows when feasible and when possible, and the non-high story buildings. Some really low technology solutions to something that we can do just from circulating air and getting more outside air into the space. In addition to those enterprise clients, what we've seen a lot of is just moving desks further apart, utilizing some conference space as individual offices. Again, not super high technology from a activation standpoint, but we'll use our different design team and project management team to ensure we have 6, 10, 12 feet of space between a chair and another chair. That way you have kind of that distancing aspect, you can feel more comfortable. And then we do our best to find other locations where we can get people working from that you ordinarily would have more for meetings and personal time. Maybe you turn that into a private office that someone feels more comfortable working out of for the time being. Now, on the co-working side, it's a little bit more interesting because you have a dichotomy of users that are going to be in here. You have everyone from every range of the spectrum, whether it's they're I want to be in the office, I need to be in the office, to maybe maybe let's talk about changing our membership type. I don't really want to come in anymore. So for our co-working memberships, what we're really trying to do is making sure that our employees at the site are comfortable, because we find that our employees are the best representation of our users. They're familiar with everyone who works there. They're on a first name basis with everyone who comes into the space, and they know exactly what they feel comfortable with. Frankly, they sometimes will just tell them unprompted, like, hey, I came in and I noticed that so-and-so wasn't wearing a mask in the space. Mm-hmm. So what we do is we really rely on our local teams. And then our technology, to bring it back to the point of this conversation, we're able to identify who is in the space and when. We have our surveys come in. Anytime you connect to our Wi-Fi, it'll kind of highlight, hey, have you been in any high risk areas? Have you been in contact with anyone? Just so we can kind of have that information and knock on wood in the worst case scenario of something occurring. And then really just trying, like I spoke about at the opening, is just to create as much space between workstations as possible and bringing in as much outside air as possible in our location. So those are what we've seen as the two things that make people the most comfortable. And then as we've gone down the line and as this has continued forward, what we've also tried to identify and tried to look for are ways to anticipate future use. So whereas in the past, in almost every real estate organization, they know how many people were in the space last Tuesday, right? They have badge swipe data. Maybe you have a specified app. Maybe you have anything, frankly. What we're trying to do is to use some predictive analytics to say, okay, we identify that on Tuesdays, this is what occurs. We know this coming Tuesday is a holiday. So how does that affect our expectation of use? And then we want to be able to provide that information to our members to say, hey, Tuesday is expected that this many people come in. And then where it gets really, from a nerdy perspective, really interesting to me, is then we can kind of track the responses to those emails and to those conversations to then further enhance our expectation, right? If we send out 100 emails saying that Tuesday is not a very busy day and we see 75 people opened and hovered on that email and read it for 20 minutes, we probably need to up our expectation of the amount of members coming in on Tuesday and then enhance our cleaning protocols and enhance other things. So we're trying to get beyond what has happened and get into the predictive side of what will happen in the future.
So that's a great transition, Ashley, into let's talk about data and analytics around the workplace and specifically around occupancy and use of space. Because I think what COVID has done is kind of catapulted this conversation forward into we need to understand real-time occupancy, not how many people were in my building yesterday based on badge swipe data, but real-time occupancy. How many people are in my building now? How many people are on this floor now? How many people are in this conference room now? And then once you start to have that data, and we can literally start to track people, then we get into this conversation about people don't like to be tracked. So Ashley, talk to us a little bit about what your thoughts are around occupancy detection, location-based services, people tracking, and how that's really impacting us today with getting people back to work during this COVID crisis, and also long-term, what is that going to do to help us operate our buildings better?
Yeah, I think one of the things that Kent said that feels really relevant here is that a lot of what we're talking about is not necessarily a competitive advantage. We're talking about doing things that are good for people and that we all as an industry need to do. We need to be able to, as an industry, be in a place where we are supporting all of us, right? We are supporting people who are working. And so I think, Darlene, you mentioned it's a little bit tricky in some ways, this conversation around people don't feel comfortable. And our approach is really to meet our clients where they are. We have a robust set of recommendations where we can work with our clients to say, look, depending on what you feel comfortable with, as Scott said, really making sure that we meet people based on their options, their comfort level. But then based on that, how can we support them and have real transparency around what the risks are based on what they opt into or not? Because we know that in some ways it's more helpful to know the specifics of who's coming into the workplace or not, but we really need, as CBRE, to support our clients based on what their needs are. So that's first and foremost. As we think about the future, though, I think what we've seen even in location sharing, and as an individual, I can speak to this. I know that in the past, early on, when it came to finding my friends, I might not have been as comfortable as I certainly feel now, where it's just one of the things that I do. I know that I use my phone and that people know where I am at almost, any point in the day. And so I think what we're seeing across the industry is that these kinds of conversations have been accelerated. They've been accelerated by the need to understand what is good for people. So if we bring all of those factors in and say, okay, how can we best support, mitigate risk, really allow people to opt in, then what conversation do we need to have about, like, using technology, occupancy sensors, using phones, using the tools that are already at our disposal right now, even as we might look to invest in the future in other hardware, right? Because not everybody, I mean, few people plan for this, right? So what do we have at our disposal now where technology can be caring, and we can have good conversations with our clients to understand what their concerns are, to help mitigate those risks, and then to figure out the right strategy so that their people feel cared for. We find that some of our clients are really forward thinking, or really much more comfortable with, let's say, location tracking, or density mapping, and others are less so. And so our job is to really be prepared to solve their needs based on where they are.
Yeah, and that's a great transition, because I hate talking about the future of work, because it makes it seem like you don't have to think about it for a while. Talking about the now of work, right? And talking about what are the tools that we currently have that we can take advantage of. So, Tommy, I want to talk to you a little bit about, let's continue on kind of the occupancy detection, people tracking conversation, because it is a little bit controversial around people tracking. On the other hand, everybody's got a smartphone. Everybody uses location-based services outside the building. I track my kids every day to find out where they are. So people are kind of used to being tracked, and whether that's through their GPS or find a restaurant near me now. I mean, location-based services, in my opinion, are probably, one of the number one tools that we can actually use. And specifically with COVID, whether it's dedensification, contact tracing, occupancy detection. So Tommy, talk to me a little bit about your thoughts in terms of using things like a mobile app for occupancy, or what are some of the other tools that we can use to help balance this, COVID era of dedensification versus the future of location-based services?
So location-based services is tricky, because where is too far? Yes, you can track your children because you pay their cell phone bill. You can't track your neighbor's children because you don't pay their cell phone bill. And if you track them, they may not like that very much, or may think you're a little creepy. So there's a fine line in what you can and cannot do. We have toyed with over the last couple of years using LTE signals to track people, because everyone has 10 Wi-Fi devices, but most people only have one cell phone. So to be able to track in building inhabitants based on the cell phone signal was a great idea, but unfortunately it didn't come to fruition because it wasn't approved. So cell phone tracking and using the cell phone to track people is great. But so I'll ask the 5-6 people on the call right now. I live in Maryland. I think Virginia has one as well. How many people have downloaded the COVID tracking app? It's there for just about anyone to use. So for contact tracing, has anyone else done it? So one person has?
Haven't done it.
So that speaks to magnitude to how much you want to be tracked. So by using the tracking on your phone, you are opting into using it. Being used against you or for you, okay, so you have a dinner date with your husband, and you have the app on your phone, and you came in contact with somebody with COVID. Do you cancel your date? Do you want to know? Do you not want to know? And then where does it stop? And then who gets the data? And that's the big part that I'm concerned with, is who owns that data long term.
Right.
Today, it's pretty simple. Tomorrow, what could be done with that data?
Well, and I think that's the great question. So Tommy, let's talk a little bit about the data collection and the privacy around that data, whether it's a temperature check that everybody in the lobby can see, whether it's your location that some people may be able to see, other people may not be able to see. And then the use of that data. And, Scott mentioned the use of the data for predictive analytics around how many people are going to be in the building tomorrow, which I think is an incredibly valuable thing to know. But again, we balance the security of that data for people who may use that data for harm. So talk to me a little bit about, the data, the use of the data, and how you're managing that type of data.
So everywhere we have set up temperature screenings, it's a private area. And in that private area is the temperature screening device, and it's 100% honor-based, and it is not tracked in any way, shape, matter, or form. And we went back and forth on it. Is it HIPAA regulation? Is it not? Do we owe it upon ourselves? So I can take that monitor, that thermometer, and take my temperature, but I have to be able to look at you and say, hey, I was 98.6 or 97.4. If in reality it was 102.7, I have to take you at your word. I'm not going to go again. There's no sheriff, and he's not going to come and say, hey, you can't come into the building because you are 102.5. So the data from our perspective is we ask you as individuals and inhabitants of our company, inhabitants of our buildings, to be honest with yourself. And that's where it all starts and ends. So collecting the data, we're not collecting it. And we took a preemptive strike to say, hey, we don't want to be responsible for that data long-term.
So from a temperature standpoint, is that really more about the psychology of getting people back safely versus the obligation of Akridge to enforce keeping people out?
Well, that's tough. It would definitely not to be to keep people out, because everybody on this panel wants people in their buildings, as do we. We own and occupy our buildings. We want to get as many people as we can back into the building. So if you, Darlene Pope, are walking into one of our buildings and you see there's a station set up there that you have to go answer a questionnaire, take your temperature, we're looking for the good in people to say, hey, you're going to fill that out honestly, and if you do, you're going to be entered into the building. If you don't, you're going to turn around and you're going to leave. Maybe you didn't know you had a temperature. Who knows? Maybe you took it and said, holy buckets, I have a temperature. I need to turn around and leave and go home and quarantine. So it's not about really being the police. It's about making sure that we're making sure that all the inhabitants of the building feel as comfortable as they can in a situation that they cannot control.
So it's one thing to have the technology and have the data. It's another thing about how you use it. So let's go back to Kent. What ways do you feel COVID has really accelerated your use of technology, whether that's smart building technology, air filtration technology? How do you feel that this COVID crisis has kind of accelerated your deployment of technologies to manage all of these issues?
Sure. So it's gone from the nice to have to the need to have. We were already moving down the path of improving our air filtration capabilities and increasing filtration use and figuring out ways that we can keep the air quality cleaner within our buildings. But now that this is in place, now we need to figure this out. We need to get to that place that much sooner. The tenant engagement platform, the communication that we're looking to have. Originally, it was a nice to have where we could, introduce people to the amenities and services, perhaps provide them some incentives and things like that, connecting them with our retailers, things that we felt would improve their workday. But at the end of the day, they could probably live without. But now, again, having that communication tool in place, we need to let them know the steps we're taking to keep them safe. We need to let them know that as long as they've opted into sharing and receiving this kind of information, who they've been in contact with that could potentially, put them at risk. And so to provide that information, we need to let them know about, if they are not adhering to social distancing or whatever, to help them kind of, manage their workday appropriately. So those are the two top line things. What else I also found interesting that Scott and Ashley touched on is certainly there's and maybe we should change the name of the panel a little bit from getting people back in my buildings to keeping companies in my buildings over the long term. So yes, the cleaning, the filtration, the touchless technologies, that's all getting them back in the building. But now we've all had this taste at a personal level, and the companies have certainly seen some of the potential savings that they could generate by having reduced square footage in our buildings. So we need to show them over the longer term the value that being in an office building provides and the flexibility that we can adhere to. I'd love to continue with 10 and 15-year leases, but that's not where the industry is going.
Let me ask you something. With this being budget season, I think the whole, our world revolves around budget seasons, right? So when we're looking at technologies that we're going to deploy next year, it's got to be in the budget this year. So we've talked about touchless technologies. We've talked about additional filtration. We've talked about mobile apps. So I guess the question is, how many people are budgeting for these technologies next year? Not just for COVID, but as you said, for post-COVID, and specifically touchless technologies. Nobody wants to push a button in an elevator, right? Because how many other people have pushed that button? Nobody wants to open a door using a door handle. So Kent, let's keep the conversation with PGIM. What are you doing now to budget for these technologies down the road?
Yeah, if you're not budgeting for those kinds of technologies, you need to be, because it does take a while to implement this stuff and put it in place. And so there needs to be money in the budget to continue down this path, because yes, in theory, there's going to be a vaccine, a treatment plan that's going to kind of offset this. Some of the technologies and the concerns that people have will go away with that, but there's some of the stuff that will stick. And so we need to kind of be thoughtful about, okay, what do we believe sticking over the long term that we need to continue to adopt? The flexible workspace and adapting to that, that's not going away. Air filtration, people that was always there, the touchless technologies, things like that, that's going to stick around. And so there needs to be budgets for those to get those in place.
So Scott, what are some of the things that you're budgeting for in terms of improving the space, whether it's touchless technologies, additional occupancy detection? What are you planning for next year?
Sure. So I want to just add one point to what Kent was talking about around budget seasoning, and then I'll definitely dive into ours individually. One of the things that we've seen is that people, while they are, budgeting for it, they don't know what they're budgeting for. And I think that's the most difficult part of where we are right now, which is, it can really almost hit this home perfectly, which is the expectation right now is that something's going to happen in the next year that makes this less of a problem, not gone, but less of a problem. And what people are trying to figure out is what do they need to invest in to ensure their employees are, frankly, able to be productive and provide value to the company. That's the main goal of everyone, right? We want our employees to be able to work well, be happy while they work, and provide value back to the company in whatever form that may be. And what's really interesting, and what I'm kind of trying to keep an eye out for, is what people think that technology is. Because now, kind of bringing it back to your question, Darlene, is that a space management solution that tracks occupancy? Is that a mobile application that requires you to log in to have access to the space? Is that new sensors that you're putting in at all of your desks and workstations to get real live data as to who's sitting in what seat at what time? Is it something that I'm not thinking about that I've never even heard of that exists out there? I mean, a few months ago, I got presented a technology that was a brand new virtual front desk tool. So you walked up to the door, and it would actually do a face scan before it let you in. And now that's your new key, is your face. And there's all kinds of different technologies out there, and it's a really unique time, and we don't know what the right thing is. But to answer your question about what Commongrounds is doing, we have a dedicated budget towards our mobile application, and we've pivoted quite a bit of our development towards user-facing and user-assisting information. So ways that we can communicate more quickly and clearly, ways that we can identify who's in the space and when, and ways that we can provide an added level of comfort. So a lot of our budget is around our internal development. We've also set aside some as a potential for newer space management tools and technologies. We have an awesome design and project management team that can turn things around very quickly to get new floor plans for our customers to try to meet their guidelines that they developed internally or with our help. And we're looking into some technologies that maybe let us do that a little faster without the use of some of the regular tools. So my answer to your question is kind of my comment to what Kent was saying, which is we have money allocated. We're expecting that we have some things we need to work on, but we're trying to make sure what we're investing in is going to match 6 months from now, not what we think is the problem right now.
Yeah. So it's interesting you mentioned facial recognition technologies, which doesn't work very well when you're wearing a mask. But Tommy, let's talk a little bit, because I think you have a really good point. The difference between investing in technologies to respond to COVID versus investing in technologies that will not only respond to COVID, but also meet long-term goals. So I think occupancy detection is the number one data set that buildings need to solve for, whether you're the owner, whether you're the tenant, whether you're the investment management company. If you don't know the use of your building, I think it's a detriment, not only in a COVID world, but also a detriment to your business. So Tommy, can you talk a little bit about, how has COVID, first of all, fast-tracked a lot of the things that you're doing with these technologies? And what are you investing in as kind of the next big thing that can not only meet your COVID requirements, but also prepare you for the future?
So I'd start by saying, over the course of the pandemic, we've averaged an electrical consumption savings of over 20% in all of our buildings.
And is that because there's nobody in the buildings, or what is that attributed to?
That's two different questions. The first side of that is it's because there's not as many people in the building. So we took advantage of being able to track how many people are in the building, and we can heat and cool the building more efficiently and effectively. So
that occupancy data is good for not only COVID, but also to run your building more efficiently based on real-time occupancy.
exactly.
Okay.
And the ability to prove that, so we've had as high as 30% occupancy when the COVID first started back in the March, April timeframe. The buildings were empty. So we had like 50% savings. But as we've ramped back up and people are going back into the buildings, we're still averaging over 22, 23% in all of our buildings. And we're still meeting lease requirements for temperatures.
And are you getting that data real time and feeding it directly to the BMS so that it's automatically doing that?
Yes, to an extent, the biggest extent we can. It's not real time, meaning 3 people walk in and we know 3 people walked in. We're doing it based on temperatures and saying, hey, okay, return air CO2s, age-old technology that we're reutilizing in newer ways to prove the fact that we can save energy. Everyone wants MERV 13 filters. Well, one of the side effects of MERV 13 filters are everybody in this panel and everybody that's listening to this knows when you breathe without a mask, it's real easy. Put a mask on your face and it's still easy, but it's a little bit harder. So as you go from a MERV 8 to 10 to 13 filters, which is what is required, you're also adding a lot of more strain to the HVAC system. And so heating and cooling, we've been able to figure out what that cycle is better with not as many people in the building, so we can ramp that up as well. So using all that data and technology that we've gotten, most of the data that we've gotten from the COVID pandemic, let's be honest, we would have never been able to do this in any other circumstance. The buildings would have run how they run. At 8 o'clock in the morning, it's 72 degrees, and at 6 o'clock at night, it goes back. That's that point. Well, now I think with the data we've collected, we can manipulate that to say that, hey, we can move it a little bit more by monitoring occupancy.
Yeah, we actually documented 52 different use cases for occupancy data within our facilities. As I said, I think it's absolutely #1 data set, not only for today, but for tomorrow. So Ashley, from your standpoint, how has COVID kind of catapulted this conversation? What do you see as, requirement for COVID versus, or in addition to preparing your facilities for the future?
Yeah, so piggybacking on what Tommy said, and by the way, Tommy, if you ever write a children's book, I think the title of it's going to have to be Holy Buckets, because that was an amazing drop. I can't believe we haven't talked about it until now. But to answer your question, what I hear also everybody saying is the #1 thing that people have to do, which isn't really about tech, is understand where you are. Really, organizations have to get deep in understanding what their infrastructure is, what their holistic picture is, because there are implications of all of these things. If we just go in and say, hey, yep, absolutely upgrade to, MERV 13, or yes, it's time to make this huge investment into, UV ionic filtering, whatever it is, there are all of these ripple effects that we really need to be able to provide a full big picture. But that requires that every client say, okay, this is what we care about, and this is how we're going to get really deep in understanding where we want to go. And what I would say to answer your question then, Darlene, is that has been an escalation beyond, as Tommy said, this is a unique window. Most organizations haven't felt the urgency around it that we know exists now. I'd say the other thing that Scott said that's really important is, so CBRE, we've long had for our own employees a hybrid flex work policy. We had done some deep investment in cloud technologies and making sure that all of our people were up on Zoom and were portable, using our own devices in some instances, et cetera. So I think starting from there, we were able to really package our own expertise and our own experience to help guide partners. And also the other area that has been really accelerated is managers and our own people with forward-thinking technology. So what, for example, will it look like to deploy HoloLens for a mixed reality facilities management approach so that our own people can remotely assess and again reduce the interaction and the points of touching, so that we can go in only when we really need to. those sorts of accelerations are happening right now.
Yeah.
And we need them to. And I think that where we have really thought about this is, again, how can technology is caring. How are we going to repurpose what our investments look like to figure out how we can do this better for everybody, including our own employees, which are our frontline workers, which is essential for us.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that COVID has taught us, if nothing else, is that business drivers change on a dime, right? Nobody expected this. And all of a sudden we've got to pivot and completely refocus. And whether that's the technology that we're focused on, whether that's the policies and procedures that we're focused on, but you have to be able to turn on a dime because our business drivers changed immediately to focus on health, safety, occupancy, et cetera. So what I want to do just to wrap up the panel, first of all, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I really appreciate it. Very thought-provoking. What I want to do is just go around and get everybody's sort of final thoughts. So, the fact that COVID made us turn on a dime, the business drivers changed, when you've got a smart building and you've got technology in your building that allows you to change on a dime and to pivot, based on what today's business drivers are and also supporting your long-term strategy. I mean, that's really, really valuable. So what I want to get from each of the panelists in terms of final thoughts is, what did you learn from COVID in terms of what were your gaps? What were your deficiencies? What did you not have that all of a sudden you had to scramble to find? So the first one is, what did you learn? And the second is, what are you going to do next? So with that, let's go to Kent and start with Kent. What did you learn and what are you doing next?
So we learned the need to have this real-time data about how our building's performing, how people are interacting with it, so that we can respond much more proactively and much more quickly to that, finding efficiencies in operations, preparing for how people are changing, how they're integrating with changing with their use of the building. And once that information is surfaced and we need to continue to improve our ability to surface and standardize that data, then taking that information over the longer term and saying, okay, how do we leverage that to make better decisions going forward? Knowing the new environment that we're going into around flexible office or needing increased flexibility, how companies are going to use their building for more meetings and conferencing and things like that. How do we use what we've learned to date to continue to pivot to a more efficient and higher functioning building? Great.
Scott, what did you learn? What are you doing next?
So me personally, I learned a lot about messenger RNA systems, which is interesting for vaccinations. Has nothing to do with ours, but I've definitely learned more about that. I think Commongrounds and myself in particular, what we've really identified and kind of learned towards is that companies are much more able to handle a disparate workforce than originally expected. That was a lot of big words to say people can work from home pretty easy. And what we've seen is that a lot of our customers are, able to handle that workforce when it's a co-working customer, because that's what they are, right? They're always working from home or from the coffee shop or from a Commongrounds or from a WeWork or Industrious, wherever. But what's interesting is those enterprise companies are start to recognize the same thing, that our employees can work from home, and in the overwhelming majority, they're just as, if not more, capable at home than they would be in the office. So what we've kind of learned from this is that people are prepared for this, this paradigm shift towards a more, more work at home and office hybrid. And what we're taking from that is, how can we assist in that change going forward? Because we think it's going to be a lot of partnership between companies like ours, Darlene, and companies like Kent's and Tommy's portfolio and Ashley's host program. I think is going to be something that's very useful when it comes to this, because it's the ability of, we want to get people in the office to collaborate, want to make sure they're comfortable and want to make sure they have what they need. But we also want to make sure that when they go home, it's not, why do I ever go into the office? And I think that's the biggest thing that we've been trying to focus on, because Commongrounds, my bad joke aside, isn't going to understand how the vaccine's going to work and what's going to end. But what we can understand is that people are working from home and they like it. But some companies still want to have that collaboration. And how can we assist with that collaboration while also making the individual comfortable and excited to go back into work?
Perfect. Ashley, what have you learned and what are you looking for next?
Yeah, I think one huge thing that we've learned is a confirmation of our gut. So we know that workplaces and spaces, they still matter. People want to really go back. People want to have the option to go back to work. Our most recent occupier survey, showed that 70% of respondents are likely to provide some flexibility in the way people work, and 70% are also confident in making long-term real estate portfolio decisions. 73% have said that hybrid and flex, spaces like HANA, like Commongrounds, are going to play a pivotal role in that future portfolio. So what that tells us is that people are really excited, and there's an opportunity. And when I say excited, but excited to have a future of real estate that meets them in new ways. And so that confirmation is big, because we've been all operating from a place of taking some big bets, but now we know and have been able to confirm that, there's a lot we can do here. And especially against a really challenging time, we can create great experiences and productive workplaces for people in lots of different ways.
Great. Tommy, final word. What did you learn and what's next?
What I learned first is that heroes aren't just people that are in capes. Heroes are the building engineers that are keeping our buildings running every day. Heroes are the people that are behind the scenes, helping with the vaccine, helping in the hospitals, helping everywhere else. I've also learned that the difference between this pandemic and the last one in 1918 is technology. And technology has allowed us to have this conversation, have this meeting, and share this with everybody out there. And the fact that my technology budget is basically no top anymore, it's even better. So now,
I love that.
Now we have to figure out what we can do. And what other people have learned is germaphobes, this is the world. And that's what next for me. I'm a germaphobe, and you've known me for a long time. What next? What happens when it goes away? Do people become very back in your space again? No.
Yeah.
It's what next, I think, is really going to be interesting, because I think, really, are we a day away from another pandemic? Are we 4 days away from another pandemic? I think that the mindset of people coming back to work, and I agree. Ashley, we have people coming back to work all the time, and the trends are still going up, even though the numbers are going up, because people need the interaction, the co-working.
Absolutely.
The collaboration here is great, but the collaboration across the table is phenomenal.
So with that, thank you so much. I know we're going a little bit over time, but it's such a great conversation. I didn't want to cut you guys short. One thing I do want to encourage you to do, go into the Purple platform. Let's head over to the exhibit hall. I know we have a networking time right now between 12 and 1. So there's lunch, networking in the exhibit hall. We've got great sessions this afternoon as well. So please come back and join us this afternoon. And then I think we've also got a closing happy hour on the rooftop. So if you haven't tried out the Purple platform, it's phenomenal. Meet me there with your avatar. I'll see you guys in the exhibit hall shortly. And please join us again this afternoon. Thank you so much for this great panel.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right. Bye, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye.